Just got to go behind the scenes for a second. My partner's a trooper battling this cold here on set and getting now to hour 3 of our program. We're glad you've taken time to spend some of your time with us here on Newsmax TV.
Hey, it's just a little cold. There's a lot of important things to talk about, JD. Thanks for that, though. I appreciate you being here because it definitely makes it easier on me. But let's go ahead and continue our conversation now about the Ukraine. Tensions have calmed somewhat in the Ukrainian region of Crimea, with Russian President Vladimir Putin saying that Moscow reserves the right to use all means to protect the Russians who are living there. But there was resistance in Kiev towards the Russian president, who refused to recognize the new government there. Putin has accused the West of encouraging an unconstitutional coup in Ukraine, declaring that actions were driving Ukraine into anarchy and warning that any sanctions the West places on Russia for its actions there will backfire. Meanwhile, military analysts say the Ukrainian military is no match for Putin's army. The new Ukrainian leadership in Kiev has accused Russia of violating a bilateral agreement on conditions of a Russian lease of a naval base there that restricts troop movements. But Russia has argued that it was acting within the terms of the deal. Ukraine estimates there are some 16,000 Russian troops now in the area, and the West has warned Moscow to pull back its troops. Also, the Russian military is much bigger, 1 million men, compared to the Ukraine's 180,000. The Ukrainian military has an estimated 200 combat aircraft and about 1,000 tanks, while Russia reportedly has about 1,400 combat aircraft and several thousand tanks. Russia and Ukraine divided the Soviet Black Sea fleet after the 1991 Soviet collapse. Secretary of State John Kerry did arrive in Kiev today, bringing with him the promise of $1 billion in American loan guarantees. And speaking of Kerry, the Secretary of State also says the deal with Iran no deal with Iran is better than a bad deal. Secretary Kerry was pushing back against those who say the nuclear talks now underway between Iran and the U.S. is one more example of a weak foreign policy. Kerry says diplomacy with Iran is better than the inherent dangers of military options. Back with me on the set is J.D. Hayworth. Great to have you with us here, J.D.
Happy to be here. Thanks very much.
All right, so Secretary Kerry speaking yesterday at AIPAC, this Political Action Committee concerned very much with Israel and this sovereignty and rights of Israel as well. Kerry having to walk a fine line here, projecting strength, but also acknowledging the difficult position that the United States is in.
It's interesting to see the situation in which Secretary Kerry finds himself, because saying now that the United States will do all it can to prevent the Iranians from developing nuclear weapons, while we get disturbing reports, what was it, within the last month, I believe the Los Angeles Times breaking the story that essentially a series of side agreements by the Obama administration, we would have to assume brokered by John Kerry, to empower the Iranians. I have to believe that regardless of party label, those who listened to the Secretary of State at AIPAC yesterday were a bit skeptical.
Well, let's get Pete Hoekstra's comments on this. Pete Hoekstra, of course, the former chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, is with us now on the phone. Pete, as always, it's great to have you with us.
John, it's good to be with you. JD, good to talk with you.
Hey, Pete, my pal, we go back a long way, 2 decades now to our time in the House, and it is great to have you back on Newsmax TV, sir.
Hey, thank you.
All right, we'll start here with the statements from Secretary Kerry at AIPAC yesterday. Pete, what was your take on the Secretary of State's statements?
Well, I'll tell you where I am with the U.S. and the Iranian talks. Number one, I testified this morning in front of the House Foreign Affairs Committee and reiterated my point of view that I thought it was a mistake to ease up on sanctions to just begin the talks. That's a very low price of entry for Iran. I mean, it's a great price of entry. All we have to do is talk, and you're going to ease economic sanctions. From my perch on top of the Intelligence Committee for a number of years, I mean, that's what Iran has always been about. It's always bargaining about time. It's always trying to get a little bit more time to develop its nuclear weapons programs, to enhance its other terrorist capabilities, and I think right now to really enhance its capabilities in a very scary area, which is to enhance its cyber warfare capabilities, both defensively and more of a concern is its offensive capabilities. the administration, Secretary Kerry, they're in a very, very weak position. They've moved the U.S. into an even weaker position. I'm surprised that he got any kind of a reception at AIPAC that was anything other than just getting booed out of the room. They've jeopardized Israel's national security.
And when you talk about national security and American national security, Pete, I can recall your days on the Intelligence Committee as chairman of that committee, inviting those of us who weren't on the committee but obviously had clearance to come take a look at some intelligence information. What we had to go through certainly impresses the gravity of the nature of the information, the sensitivity, and obviously in your role as chairman of the Intelligence Committee, it is both a great opportunity and an awesome responsibility, which leads me to this point. Within the past 2 days, there has been talk that the Obama administration, perhaps even as recently as yesterday with Prime Minister Netanyahu at the White House, talked that the administration is asking the Israelis to have a far less assertive role, and I'm trying to pick my words very carefully, but there have been any number of Iranian nuclear scientists who have met a premature end, and we are reading reports in the press that the Obama administration is actually asking the Israelis to take a more placid approach to what is going on in Iran. Is there credibility and veracity behind those reports from this administration?
I would believe that that there's some credibility to those reports, that this administration is asking Israel to be much more restrained in whatever efforts it may be undertaking to contain the Iranian program. Arguing that the sensitivity of the talks, require restraint by the United States and by Israel. From my perspective, the United States, Israel, and others who are thoroughly committed to stopping Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, as these talks are going on, we should continue to engage in whatever efforts we can to, sidetrack, derail, whatever analogy you want to use, whatever phrase you want to use. We shouldn't stop our efforts to, get to stop their nuclear program.
And Pete, as we look at
this,
this,
I think this administration clearly is, they're bowing to Iran and they're badgering our allies. It's really amazing.
And Pete, we look at these talks here. We saw Benjamin Netanyahu at the White House yesterday speaking with President Obama, and again having to remind him in a press conference about some of the things that Iran continues to say, calling for the elimination of Israel from the map as a whole. Do you think these talks should be completely abandoned here at this point, considering as we look at the situation in the Ukraine? Can John Kerry really keep his eye on both of these balls of yarn?
Well, actually, I think they're both. I think the events are related. You cannot look at international affairs and look at them in silos and say that there's no relationship between what's going on in Ukraine and what's going on in Iran. The bottom line with what's happening in Ukraine is there's new fault lines between Russia, the UK, France, the United States, and that fault line means that Russia is going to develop a closer relationship with Iran, which means I think that the P5+1 talks on the Iranian nuclear program, they're doomed to fail. Russia is not going to exert or use any pressure to get Iran to a negotiating table and give up its nuclear
It is certainly all connected.
program.
Former Chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, Pete Hoekstra, great to have you with us, Pete, and we'll have you back soon, right?